Chapter 7, My Teacher Maria. One night I went to the Unknowns' hood on Levitt and Schiller Streets, just a couple of blocks from the Lord's hood. I was going to take Speedy up on his invitation to set me up with older high school girls. The Unknowns were a pretty big gang. There were always at least 10 or 15 guys on each corner. They had a mural on a wall that took up the whole side of a building. The mural consisted of two reapers holding shotguns standing on opposite sides of a shield that had the letters UK written in the center. The word insane was written in a ribbon above the shield. I found Speedy smoking a joint in front of the building where the mural was painted. I asked him about the wild girls he was talking about. He told me that if I had money for some weed, we could get laid that very night. We picked up Papa to see if he had any cash. Papa was as broke as we were. We went walking, trying to find someone who did have money to join us. We walked by Thule and ran into Rican, Snake. Rican had become very friendly with me and stopped to talk to me. He asked me about the night his brother got killed. I told him that I didn't see what happened, that I just heard the gunshots. Tears flowed out of his eyes as I spoke to him. He swore that the Cobras would not get away with killing his brother. I didn't doubt him for a minute. I knew that Rican sold bags of weed, so I asked him for one. He gave me two and told me that whenever I wanted some, all I had to do was ask. I thanked him and left with Papa and Speedy. As we walked, the guys explained that Rican's very friendly treatment was his way of recruiting me for the Lords. It didn't matter to me as long as I was getting free weed. Besides, I intended to join the Lords. Speedy took us to a house located across the street from Wicker Park. Wicker Park is located on Dammit Avenue between Division and North Avenues. He said that 4 women lived in the 3rd floor apartment. 3 of them were teenagers and the other one was one of their mothers. Speedy said they were so easy that their apartment was known as the Fuck House. The mother and daughter were named Maria and Lucy, respectively. Maria was one wild woman. She was about 35 years old, but dressed, acted, and looked like she was in her early 20s. Her son had been killed in a car accident, and her husband, a Latin king, was in jail serving 40 years for murder. Lucy was 17 years old, with short, kinky hair and brown eyes. She was a little flat-chested, but she made up for it with the rest of her body. Speedy called her Miss Ass for obvious reasons. The other 2 girls were runaways. Their names were Yolanda and Myra. Yolanda was a chubby 16-year-old girl with shoulder-length dirty blonde hair and brown eyes. Yolanda wore tons of makeup and skimpy, revealing clothing. Every other word that girl said was a cuss word. Myra was also 16, with short black hair and brown eyes. She was a very beautiful girl with a body you would kill for, but according to Speedy, you didn't have to. All you had to do was get her high and she was yours. Myra went out of her way to be sexy. She exaggerated her walk and spoke with a low, almost moaning type of voice. I found Myra's ways very attractive and couldn't help staring at her. She was the one I wanted to be with, but I didn't know how to approach her. I decided to sit and wait for things to happen, then I would make my move. We rolled up the weed and split the joints evenly among Papo, Speedy, and myself so that we wouldn't have to bother each other once we got the girls alone. Papo and Myra quickly got into a conversation and went into another room after he whispered something in her ear. Lucy excused herself, saying she was going to the bar on the corner to see if her mother Myra was still there. Speedy sat next to Yolanda, and they started whispering and giggling. I thought they were talking about me because every time something was said, Yolanda would look my way and giggle. After a few minutes of giggling, they got up and proceeded to a room in the back of my apartment. Speedy came back and told me not to waste any time when Lucy came back. After one joint, you will never forget why they call her Juicy Lucy, Speedy told me. It was bad enough that I was already nervous. Now I was scared. I had never had sex before. I was a virgin. And I just knew that after tonight, I would be the joke of the neighborhood. These girls were very sexually experienced. It wasn't likely that Lucy would keep my virginity a secret. But I decided to hell with it. As long as I got laid for the first time in my life, everything would be cool. It seemed as if Lucy had gotten lost on her way to the corner. She was taking a long time to return. There I was, sitting in the dark, anticipating my first sexual experience, fantasizing about what would happen when I heard her voice. My heart nearly jumped out of my mouth, and my body began to tremble. As I listened closely, I realized that her voice was just coming from outside. I looked out the window and saw Lucy inside of a car kissing and letting herself be touched by a man who was twice her age. He started the car and they drove away. I was very disappointed. I listened through the door of the room where Papo and Myra were and heard giggling, laughter, and moaning. I felt depressed and envious. I sat in the darkest corner I could find and lit up a joint, hoping I could get the image of Lucy and me having sex out of my mind. The reason Speedy and Papo got lucky and I didn't had to be because they were in a gang. I began to regret coming with them, but at the same time, I couldn't wait to return another day, regardless of the outcome. I sat and entered my imaginary world, fantasizing about things and rubbing my crotch. The first thing that came to my mind was, alright, Juicy Lucy is back. Then I became nervous. After some debating, I found the courage to go into the kitchen and make my move on Lucy. I found her mother Maria there instead. Maria was bending over, looking in the refrigerator. She had a really short, tight skirt on. I couldn't help but stand there and stare. She was muttering something about not having any beer. She turned around and saw me staring at her and said, "Who the fuck are you? I never seen you here before. Did you get a kick out of looking at my ass?" I didn't answer. I panicked. She walked over to where I was and took the joint from my hand. She walked to the table, pulled a lighter out of her purse, and lit up my joint. Maria opened the back door that led into a closed porch and said, "Come on if you want to smoke." I stood there motionless. "Don't be scared, I don't bite," Maria said as she motioned me over to where she was. Maria took me into a porch area that had been converted into a room. There was a small table, 2 chairs, and an old couch there. I was so scared my body trembled and I couldn't walk. Maria told me to sit down and relax while she laughed at my nervousness. Maria puffed on the joint, then asked me if I wanted a shotgun. A shotgun is when you put the lit part of the joint to your mouth and blow out so that a lot of smoke comes out the other end where someone else inhales it. I thought, why the hell is she offering me a shotgun? I didn't know what she was talking about, so I didn't answer. Maria put the joint in her mouth and kneeled in front of me, inches from my face. She blew so much smoke into my mouth that it made me choke. My eyes became blurry with tears. I could hear Maria laughing, telling me to hold the smoke in. After the effects wore off, Maria asked me to give her a shotgun so that I could learn what to do with all the smoke. Maria sat down on the couch and I stood in front of her. I carefully put the lit part of the joint in my mouth, closed my lips around it, bent over close to Maria's face and blew. She inhaled the smoke like a vacuum. Then she stuck out her tongue and licked my bottom lip. I jumped back, fell, and burned my tongue on the joint. I sat there giggling while Maria laughed hysterically. When she stopped laughing, she said, "What's wrong? Just learning, huh? ¿De dónde eres? Nunca te había visto." "Where are you from? I've never seen you before." I got up off the floor and sat on the chair directly across from her. I stared at her, scared, wanting to get up and run, but too nervous to do so. Maria sensed my nervousness and began teasing me. "Good-looking guy like you with hazel eyes. Are you Puerto Rican or gringo?" Her skirt was hoisted almost up to her waist, and I could see her panties. I couldn't stop myself from trying to see more. She was very aware of what I was thinking and kept opening her legs slightly and then crossing them. I relit the joint and tried to act cool, but she saw right through it. "You must be gringo," Maria said. "A boricua ya me había comido." A Puerto Rican would have already eaten me. Maria got up, locked the door, sat next to me, and began asking me questions I had no answer for. Yeah, I know, I can't speak Spanish for shit. I just nodded to everything. She asked me if I found her attractive. Did I think she was sexy? The truth was that Maria was better looking than her daughter Lucy, but she had a strong odor of alcohol and cigarettes that was making me sick. I nodded my approval of her looks as I felt her hand rubbing my leg. She rested her hand on my groin and began squeezing. Then she stopped. I was so nervous, I couldn't move. She looked at me and said, "You're a virgin." I love virgins. I'm going to teach you everything you need to know about pleasing a woman. Maria stood up and undressed herself slowly while explaining how I should go about undressing a woman. I forgot all about how bad she smelled. I stared at her naked body with no clue as to what I should do. Maria made all the moves for both of us. Never once did she open her eyes and look at me until we were finished. That night I became a man, or so I thought. Maria taught me all about sex. She showed me the pleasures of oral sex. Maria held my head down on her as she instructed my every move. Women will fall in love with you if you do it to them right, Maria explained. I asked her if she was in love with me. She giggled and said no, but with more practice, anything could happen. Don't be so shy or you'll miss out on a lot of things, she advised. When it was all over, she kissed me deeply, then began getting dressed. I was only 13. I was too young to understand that what Maria did was wrong. At the time, I thought sex with an older woman was the stuff of dreams. Now, I know that's bullshit. Yes, I learned about sexual feelings that night, but nothing else. No emotions, no thoughts, or nothing else was shared. It was sex and nothing more. In every neighborhood I ever hung out in, there was a home like Maria's. Adult women having sex with young men, or in my case, boys. There were always homes where runaway kids could be found, places where they were welcomed, where there were no rules. Every neighborhood had fuck houses where kids could hide from the truth. Papo, Speedy, Myra, and Yolanda were in the living room smoking weed. Myra said, "How was he, Lucy?" Maria answered, "He was great. And you better stay away from him, he's mine," as she left the house giggling. Everybody looked at me like I was crazy. Nobody said a word. They just stared at me with the look of disbelief on their faces. It was getting pretty late, so I left. On the way back to the hood, all we talked about was Maria. I felt like some kind of stud, especially after the things I had learned from Maria. The guys wanted me to tell them what happened. Maria told me that women love men who didn't kiss and tell, so I told them that we just got high. Back in the hood, Papo told all the guys about Maria and me. "Oh boy, fuck Maria," Papo said. I was just hoping that Jenny didn't find out. In fact, I couldn't wait to try the techniques Maria had taught me on Jenny. I had always had sexual thoughts about Jenny. These suddenly became graphic. I would picture her in my mind as my sex student. I imagined what her naked body would look like and how she would react to my sexual advances. After that episode with Maria, graphic thoughts of sex occupied my mind on an almost constant basis. Every attractive woman that passed before my eyes, whether in real life, on television, or in a magazine, became a subject of my graphic sexual fantasies. If I found a woman attractive, I fantasized about her. Maria was 35, I was 13. She led, I followed. Yet, in the eyes of the guys in the hood, I was a stud. Maria prepared me for sexual encounters with females, but she did nothing to prepare me for the emotional beauty sex involves. In the long run, Maria's lesson hurt my subsequent relationships with women more than it helped. I went home, climbed up between the two buildings, and went into my room through the window. Once in my room, I listened quietly for activity in the house. I didn't hear Pedro or my mother. I came out of my room to find my sisters watching television. My mom and Pedro were out. My older sister told me that my mom and Pedro were talking about moving to Puerto Rico again. Pedro had already bought the plane tickets for the trip. He was going to the island first to prepare what was supposed to be our house. We would follow shortly. As soon as my sister told me the news, I began making plans to make sure that I would miss that plane. A couple days later, my mom went to our schools and got our transfer records. Now I knew that she was serious. I went over 1,000 plans in my mind for how I could stay here in the United States. All of them were interrupted by sexual thoughts of Jenny. It was obvious that I would be going to Puerto Rico whether I liked it or not. I made up my mind to have sex with Jenny before I left. Nothing else was important. The day before we were to leave, I walked Jenny home for what I thought would be the last time. I told her about my inevitable move to Puerto Rico. She expressed disappointment and said she didn't want me to go. We made our usual detour so that we could be alone. This was the first time I had been alone with Jenny since that night with Maria. Jenny's reaction to my sexual advances shocked me. She responded to my blowing in her ears and kissing her face and neck with loud moans and heavy breathing. That studly feeling came over me again. The things Maria taught me actually worked. I was surprised that I was able to touch her breast and groin area without her getting mad as she usually did. I opened her blouse but couldn't find the clip on the back of her bra. Don't feel bad, it happens to all of us. Jenny took my hands and showed me where the clip was in the front. I became somewhat nervous, but not enough to make me stop what I had started. I tried to pull down her pants, but she put that to a stop. I got upset and bit her nipple. At that point, the only thing on my mind was sex. Jenny's feelings were not important to me. Jenny noticed my anger and apologized. She didn't have any reason to, but she did anyway. I went on, trying to get her to have sex with me, but she kept saying no. She reminded me that I would be leaving Chicago. She said, if I wasn't leaving, she might go all the way. I told Jenny that I was not going to Puerto Rico while she was I told Jenny that I was not going to Puerto Rico, still wrestling with her pants. She didn't believe me, but promised that if I didn't go, she would give herself to me. From that moment, I didn't care what happened. I was not going to Puerto Rico. We fixed our clothes and continued to walk towards Jenny's house. We held hands but did not say a word to each other. I don't know what was going through her mind, but all I was thinking about was where I would stay if I didn't go to Puerto Rico. At Jenny's, we didn't talk like we usually did before saying goodbye. We kissed and then she went inside her house and I went to the bus stop. Not a word was said. I went back to the neighborhood and ran into Rican. He invited me to smoke weed at the Lord's clubhouse. He asked me if the rumor going around about Maria and me was true. When I told him it was, he busted out laughing. He said that Maria had robbed the cradle and referred to her as a child molester. I assured him that it was all right as long as I was the child she was molesting. You're a kid, Rican said. Maria is an old woman. You're a kid, Rican said. Maria is an old woman. She shouldn't be doing things like that with you. Yeah, she's a fine old woman, was my response. I told him what had happened that night in detail. He just sat there with a freaky look on his face and shaking his head in disbelief. What a bitch, Rican said as he handed me a joint. Rican sat there silently for a moment, then asked if I wanted to be a Lord. I said I didn't know. He reminded me that the Lords considered me one of the boys. I told Rican about my family getting ready to move to Puerto Rico and that I didn't want to go. He was surprised by the news and began to tell me stories about Puerto Rico. He then expressed his disappointment that I wouldn't be joining the Spanish Lords. I told Rican that I felt like I was walking into a cage where Pedro could beat my ass anytime he wanted to. Rican said he understood. He also had an abusive father. He told me that if I decided to stay, I could sleep in the Lords' clubhouse if I wanted to. Rican's words, coupled with my desire for Jenny, made me decide to stay. I just had to figure out a way how to get away from my mom. We were to leave for the airport at 6 a.m. the following morning. I went home that night and unpacked things that I wanted to keep, basically some clothes and my school transfers. I went to sleep and woke up at about 5 a.m. My mom was already up looking forward to the trip. She went in the bathroom and turned on the shower. I took the opportunity to leave the house. We were to leave for the airport at 6 a.m. the following morning. I went home that night and unpacked the things that I wanted to keep, basically some clothes and my school transfers. I went to sleep and woke up at about 5 a.m. My mom was already up looking forward to the trip. She went in the bathroom and turned on the shower. I took the opportunity to leave the house. I grabbed my clothes and headed out the door as quickly and as quietly as I could, but I found I just couldn't do it. I was too scared. The thought of being on my own at 13 with no home and no food terrified me. I would just have to put up with Pedro. Puerto Rico, here I come.